Settle yourself now, dear listener, into the softest corner of your imagination, where the weight of the day dissolves like morning mist and time moves with the unhurried pace of clouds drifting across an endless sky. Tonight, we journey together to a place beyond the reach of mortal concerns, where the air itself seems to shimmer with golden light, and every breath carries the scent of ambrosia and eternal spring. We are bound for Mount Olympus, that sacred peak that rises not from any earthly mountain range, but from the realm of dreams and ancient memory. Here, where marble halls stretch into infinity and fountains sing with water that never grows stale. The gods of Greece make their eternal home. But do not expect tales of thunderous battles or dramatic transformations. No, tonight, we seek the quieter corners of divinity, where even immortal beings sometimes find themselves with nothing pressing to accomplish in all of eternity to accomplish it in. The Olympus we visit is not the Olympus of epic poetry, where heroes clash and fates are decided with earth-shaking consequences. Instead, we find ourselves in the peaceful hours between great events, in the gentle spaces where gods recline on cushions of woven starlight and contemplate the slow turning of celestial wheels. Here, urgency is unknown, and the greatest dramas unfold not in mighty confrontations, but in the subtle stirrings of divine consciousness, seeking something new too. Occupy the endless afternoon of immortality. Picture, if you will, halls so vast that their furthest walls disappear into soft golden haze, where columns of pristine marble support a sky that knows neither storm nor shadow. The floor beneath divine feet is smooth as silk, inlaid with patterns that shift like living things, telling stories in precious stones that reorganize themselves according to the moods of their immortal observers. Fountains play in every courtyard, their waters singing melodies that would reduce mortal listeners to tears of joy. Yet here they provide merely pleasant background music to the unhurried conversations of gods. The very air here moves with a different quality than earthly atmosphere. It carries sounds farther and with greater clarity, so that a whispered word in one chamber might reach listening ears in a hall 1,000 paces away. Yet for all this perfect acoustic environment, there are long stretches when the only sounds are the gentle splash of fountains, the soft rustle of divine robes, and the distant harmonies of the muses practicing in their sacred grove. Time, self, behaves differently in this elevated realm, where mortals measure their days by the urgent tick of heartbeats and the relentless march of seasons. Divine time flows like honey, thick and golden and wonderfully slow. A single conversation between gods might stretch across what mortals would measure as hours. Each word considered carefully, each response weighted with the accumulated wisdom of eons. There is no hurry here, no pressing deadline, environment of perfect leisure and unlimited time. We discover that even gods can experience something remarkably similar to what mortals know as boredom. Not the frustrated restlessness of those constrained by circumstances beyond their control, but rather the gentle melancholy that comes when every pleasure has been tasted, every skill mastered, every wonder explored until familiarity has worn smooth the edges of delight. It is into this realm of beautiful monotony that we now venture, is seeking not excitement or adventure, but rather the quiet satisfaction that comes when creativity emerges, not from necessity, but from the simple desire to bring something new into existence. Our story unfolds in the drowsy warmth of an Olympian afternoon, where the greatest drama will be the gentle stirring of inspiration in the mind of a god who has everything any being could desire, yet finds himself yearning for something that does not yet exist. Let your breathing slow now, matching the unhurried rhythm of divine time, as we settle into a tale that will unfold with the patience of immortals and the gentle insistence of dreams. Here, in the golden light of Olympus, where even silence has a musical quality, we prepare to witness the birth of something beautiful, created not from desperation or ambition, but from the divine equivalent of a peaceful afternoon's idle fancy. Life on Mount Olympus. The daily rhythms of Olympian life flow with the stately grace of a river that has never known drought or flood, following patterns established at the very beginning of time and maintained with the effortless consistency that only immortal beings can achieve. Each dawn, if dawn has meaning in a realm where light comes not from any sun, but from the divine presence of the gods themselves, brings the same sublime routine that has marked countless ages without variation or interruption. Zeus awakens first among the immortals, not because he requires more rest than the others, but because the habit of leadership runs so deep in his divine nature that even sleep cannot completely suspend his awareness of responsibility. He rises from his bed of woven clouds, stretches limbs that have never known fatigue, and moves to the great balcony that overlooks all of creation. From this vantage point, he observes the mortal world far below, where tiny human dramas play out like shadows cast by a distant fire. The morning survey is conducted without urgency or particular concern. Kingdoms rise and fall in the space of what mortals call centuries, but to Zeus, they appear as brief flickers of activity. No more consequential than the scurrying of ants in a garden. Wars are fought and won, cities built and destroyed, heroes born and laid to rest. All within the span of time, it takes the king of gods to finish his first cup of nectar and decide whether the day requires any divine intervention. Usually it does not. The world below has its own momentum, its own systems of cause and effect that function quite adequately without constant divine oversight. This is both the blessing and the burden of omnipotence. The knowledge that one's intervention is rarely necessary, that the great machine of existence can run quite smoothly without the constant attention of its creators. In the adjacent chambers, the other gods begin their own unhurried morning routines. Hera tends to her sacred peacocks, birds of such extraordinary beauty that their feathers contain captured rainbows. Their calls harmonies that would shame the most skilled mortal musicians. She moves among them with the serene dignity of one who has never doubted her own divine status, feeding them ambrosia from golden bowls while discussing the finer points of cosmic gossip with her favorite attendants. Athena spends her mornings in contemplation, sitting perfectly still in her chamber of polished marble, while her mind ranges across the accumulated wisdom of ages. New knowledge comes to her constantly, the insights of mortal philosophers, the discoveries of inventors, the theories of mathematicians and astronomers, all filtering through her divine consciousness like light through crystal. She processes each new understanding with patient attention, adding it to the vast library of knowledge that comprises her divine essence. Aphrodite's mornings are devoted to beauty in all its forms, though her understanding of beauty encompasses far more than mere physical appearance. She tends gardens where flowers bloom in colors that have no names in mortal languages, arranges patterns of light and shadow that would inspire mortal artists to create masterpieces, and composes harmonies of scent and sound that influence the emotional climate of the entire mountain. The breakfast gathering, when it occurs, unfolds in the great dining hall, with its tables of gold and ivory, its chairs that adjust themselves to perfectly support each divine frame, its windows that look out upon views that change according to the aesthetic preferences of whoever happens to be gazing through them. Conversations flow like gentle streams, meandering from topic to topic without destination or deadline. These breakfast discussions might concern the philosophical implications of mortal behavior, the aesthetic merits of various artistic movements in the world below, or the complex relationships between different aspects of natural phenomena. Gods debate the relative beauty of sunsets and sunrises, analyze the mathematical properties of flower petals, or share observations about the evolving patterns of bird migration. Yet for all their charm and sophistication, these conversations follow familiar patterns. The same divine personalities express the same general viewpoints on similar topics, drawing from wells of experience that are vast but not infinite. Even immortal beings have characteristic ways of thinking, preferred subjects of discussion, habitual responses to particular types of questions. The blessing of unlimited time can become, in its own way, a kind of gentle prison when every possible conversation has been held countless times before. The afternoon hours typically find the gods pursuing their individual interests and responsibilities. Artemis ranges through her sacred forests, though she has long since cataloged every tree, every stream, every creature that dwells within their bounds. Her hunts have become ritualistic rather than challenging, since no mortal prey can provide genuine sport for a goddess whose arrows never miss their intended targets. Demeter tends her eternal gardens, coaxing growth from plants that were already perfect at the moment of their creation. Her work brings her satisfaction, but it is the satisfaction of maintenance rather than discovery, for preserving beauty rather than creating something genuinely new. Even the muses, those divine inspirers of mortal creativity, sometimes find themselves repeating variations on themes they have explored countless times before. Their dances, though flawless, follow familiar patterns. Their songs, though beautiful beyond mortal comprehension, express emotions and ideas that have been refined to crystalline perfection over ages of repetition. As evening approaches and the golden light of Olympus deepens to the color of aged honey, the gods often gather once again for dinner and conversation. These meals are leisurely affairs that might last for what mortals would measure as days, with courses that appear as if by magic and wines that enhance divine perception without clouding divine judgment. The evening conversations tend toward reflection and memory, gods sharing stories from the ancient days when the world was young and every mortal development brought genuine surprise. They speak of the first cities, the first wars, the first great works of art, all with the gentle nostalgia of beings who have watched so many cycles of mortal achievement that individual examples blur together into patterns of repetition as the Olympian night settles over the divine realm, bringing not darkness but a softening of the eternal golden glow. The gods retire to their chambers for rest that is more habit than necessity. In the perfect silence that follows, it's broken only by the distant music of fountains and the whispered conversations of nighttime breezes, the mountain itself seems to settle into peaceful contemplation of another day that has passed exactly as countless days before it. Beautiful and perfect and utterly gently predictable among all the children of Zeus, none embodies the paradox of divine perfection quite like Apollo, whose very presence transforms any space into a shrine to beauty and light. When he enters a room, his golden hair catches and multiplies the ambient light of Olympus, creating an aureole that seems to have captured and concentrated the essence of every perfect sunrise that has ever graced the mortal world. His physical form represents the absolute pinnacle of masculine beauty, every proportion calculated according to mathematical principles that transcend mortal understanding of harmony and balance. Yet this perfection, which might inspire worship in mortal observers, has become for Apollo himself a kind of beautiful burden. When every glance and any reflective surface returns the same flawless image, when every appearance before mortals or immortals alike produces the same awed reactions, even divine vanity begins to lose its appeal. Apollo's daily duties reflect the breadth of his divine portfolio, encompassing responsibilities that would challenge a dozen lesser deities. Each morning finds him harnessing the solar chariot, those magnificent steeds of living flame who have carried the sun across the sky since the beginning of time. The ritual of preparation has been refined over eons to a sequence of movements as precise as a sacred dance, each gesture executed with practiced perfection. The horses themselves, creatures of such power that their breath could melt mountains and their hoofbeats create thunder, respond to his touch with the docility of beloved pets. They know their route across the heavens as intimately as the veins in their own fiery hearts, requiring no guidance from their divine charioteer beyond the familiar comfort of his presence. The journey unfolds with the same magnificent predictability as every solar passage before it. Beautiful beyond mortal comprehension, yet utterly routine for its immortal guide. Upon his return to Olympus each evening, Apollo assumes his other divine responsibilities with the same flawless competence that marks all his endeavors. Mortals seek his guidance through the sacred oracles, and he provides prophecies with the measured precision of one who sees all possible futures spread before him like an infinite map. Yet even divine omniscience can become mundane when every prediction proves accurate. When every cryptic utterance unfolds exactly as foreseen, his role as patron of poetry and music brings him into contact with mortal creativity in all its imperfect, struggling glory. He inspires bards and musicians, guiding their faltering efforts toward greater beauty and truth. Yet the very perfection of his own musical abilities creates a barrier between him and the joy of discovery that characterizes mortal artistic endeavor. When his silver lyre produces melodies of absolute perfection, when every note emerges exactly as intended, with crystalline purity. Where is the thrill of creation that drives mortal artists to continue their endless quest for beauty? The healing arts, too, fall within Apollo's divine purview, and he exercises these powers with compassionate efficiency. Diseases flee at his approach, wounds close at his touch. Mortal suffering dissolves under the radiance of his divine attention. Yet even divine mercy becomes routine when exercised across centuries. When the same ailments require the same perfect remedies, when gratitude follows the same predictable patterns of awe and worship, perhaps most tellingly, Apollo's pursuit of mortal love has followed disappointingly similar patterns throughout his immortal existence. His divine beauty attracts admirers whose responses, while genuine, rarely surprise him. Mortal hearts flutter, and divine hearts respond with the same combinations of passion, pursuit, and eventual gentle melancholy when the inherent differences between mortal and immortal natures make lasting connection impossible. Even his relationships with his fellow gods have settled into comfortable but unchanging patterns. His twin sister Artemis remains his closest companion. Yet their conversations follow familiar paths worn smooth by countless repetitions. His rivalry with his half-brother, Hermes, has evolved into an amicable competition whose outcomes no longer carry genuine suspense. His interactions with Zeus blend filial respect with the secure knowledge of his own favored status, creating a dynamic that has remained essentially static for eons. The artistic pursuits that once brought Apollo genuine satisfaction have gradually lost their capacity to surprise or challenge him. He has composed songs that would reduce mortal listeners to tears of transcendent joy, created poems that captured the essence of beauty itself, produced artistic works that represent the absolute pinnacle of creative achievement. Yet perfection, once attained, offers no further destination toward which to strive. In quieter moments, usually during the long afternoons when his official duties are complete and the other gods are occupied with their own immortal concerns, Apollo sometimes finds himself sitting in his favorite alcove overlooking the mortal world, his silver lyre resting silent in his lap while his divine mind wanders through the labyrinth of eternal existence. These periods of contemplation have grown more frequent in recent eons, marked not by dissatisfaction, but by a gentle curiosity about what, if anything, might still hold the power to surprise him. It is during these reflective interludes that Apollo occasionally notices aspects of mortal existence that his divine perfection cannot easily replicate. The way mortals stumble toward beauty through trial and error, their imperfect attempts carrying an authenticity that his flawless performances somehow lack. The genuine surprise in mortal voices when they discover a new melody, create an unexpected harmony, or find words that capture previously inexpressible emotions. These observations do not inspire. Envy gods are incapable of such petty emotions, but rather a kind of curious longing for the experience of genuine discovery, for the thrill of creating something that surprises even its creator. It is this gentle yearning, this divine equivalent of creative restlessness, that has begun to stir more frequently in Apollo's perfect consciousness, like the first whisper of wind that precedes a change in weather. On this particular morning, indistinguishable from countless others in the eternal cycle of Olympian time, Apollo rises from his bed of woven sunbeams with the same fluid grace that has marked his movements. Since the beginning of creation, the chamber around him glows with the soft radiance that emanates from his divine presence. Golden light playing across marble walls that have witnessed the same routine for more years than mortals have existed to count them. The ritual of preparation unfolds with meditative precision. Apollo's reflection gazes back at him from mirrors of polished silver, showing the same perfect features that have never aged, never changed, never surprised him with unexpected variations. He arranges his golden hair with movements so practiced they require no conscious thought, each strand falling into its appointed place as if guided by invisible hands that remember every perfect configuration. His robes, woven from light itself by craftsmen whose skills transcend mortal understanding, drape themselves around his divine form with the easy elegance of water flowing downhill. The fabric shimmers and shifts, creating patterns that would hypnotize mortal observers. Yet Apollo barely notices their beauty anymore. Perfection, when it becomes routine, loses its power to inspire wonder even in its possessor. The solar chariot awaits him in its celestial stable, the horses of fire stamping their hooves against clouds that hiss and steam at the contact. These magnificent creatures, each one capable of reducing mountains to ash with a single snort, greet their divine charioteer with the familiar whinnying that has marked countless dawn preparations. In a farmer's field, an old man whistles while he works, creating melodies that emerge from his mood rather than from any formal musical training. Most intriguingly, Apollo's attention is captured by a shepherd who sits beneath an ancient oak tree, fashioning a simple flute from a hollow reed. The young man's hands work without precise plan, shaping the instrument according to half-remembered instructions, an intuitive understanding of how breath might move through the wooden tube to create sound. When he raises the completed flute to his lips, the first notes that emerge are tentative, exploratory, as he discovers what his creation can do, rather than imposing his will upon it. The music that follows is imperfect by any objective standard. Notes crack occasionally, rhythms waver, melodies meander without formal structure or conclusion. Yet there is something in these flawed sounds that Apollo's own perfect performances have never contained. A quality of genuine discovery that transforms technical imperfection into emotional authenticity. As he observes this humble scene of mortal creativity, Apollo feels the stirring of an idea so radical that it momentarily overwhelms his divine composure. What if he were to create something not through the exercise of divine will, imposing perfection upon raw materials, but through a process of exploration and discovery, similar to what he observes in mortal craftsmanship? What if he were to make something whose final form would surprise even its creator? The thought is both thrilling and slightly terrifying, challenging fundamental assumptions about the nature of divine creativity that have governed his existence since the beginning of time. Yet the restlessness that has plagued him throughout this endless day suddenly finds focus and direction. Coalescing around this unprecedented possibility, like iron filings drawn to a magnet, Apollo turns away from his observation of the mortal world and begins to walk back toward the palace, his movements now charged with purpose for the first time in eons. Yet his destination is not his familiar music chamber with its collection of perfect instruments, but rather the workshops where divine craftsmen pursue their various arts. Spaces he has rarely visited since his own creative abilities surpassed any need for external tools or guidance. As he walks, his mind begins to turn over possibilities, not planning in his usual methodical way, but rather allowing ideas to emerge and evolve like the spontaneous melodies of that mortal shepherd. Something new is stirring in the golden halls of Olympus, something that has never existed before and for the first time in countless ages. Apollo finds himself genuinely curious about what tomorrow might bring. The workshops of Olympus occupy a series of chambers carved into the living rock of the divine mountain, spaces where the more practical aspects of godhood are pursued away from the ceremonial grandeur of the main palace. Here, divine craftsmen work with materials that exist only in the celestial realm, metals that hold starlight in their crystalline structure, woods that sing when shaped by skilled hands, stones that remember the songs of their formation and release those melodies when properly carved. Apollo enters these working spaces with the hesitant step of one venturing into unfamiliar territory. Though the workshops have existed since the beginning of Olympian time, the air here carries different qualities than the perfumed atmosphere of the palace proper. Sense of honest labor, the ozone smell of creative energy, the earthy aromas of materials being transformed by skillful hands. Even the light behaves differently, focusing itself into practical illumination rather than the diffuse golden glow that characterizes divine living spaces. Yet as Apollo surveys the tools and materials available for his use, he finds himself strangely reluctant to begin the process of creation. The perfect chisels and planes, the flawless sheets of celestial metal, the precisely measured lengths of singing wood, all of these resources seem somehow too refined for what he has in mind. too removed from the humble imperfection that inspired his current quest. Instead, he finds himself drawn back outside. But now his attention focuses on aspects of the divine realm that he has never before considered as potential sources of creative inspiration. The wind that moves constantly through the marble corridors of Olympus, usually so soft and perfectly conditioned that it barely registers on divine consciousness, reveals itself upon closer attention to be full of subtle variations and spontaneous shifts that create ever-changing patterns of sound and pressure. He pauses in a courtyard where the breeze moves through a stand of golden bamboo, each stalk swaying with its own rhythm while contributing to the overall dance of the grove. The sounds produced by this natural orchestration are neither random nor precisely composed, but something in between, a kind of organized spontaneity that emerges from the interaction between wind and plant without conscious design by any intelligent creator. Apollo extends his divine senses to encompass other examples of this phenomenon, seeking patterns of natural beauty that arise from process rather than planning. In a distant part of the divine realm, water flows over rocks worn smooth by countless ages of gentle erosion, each drop following the path of least resistance, yet collectively creating a harmony of sound that no composer could have deliberately arranged. The music of water meeting stone unfolds according to principles of physics and geology, yet the result transcends mere mechanical interaction to achieve something that can only be called beauty. Bees work among the divine flower gardens, their wings creating complex patterns of vibration that serve the practical purpose of flight while generating harmonics that blend and separate in ways that follow the mathematical principles of sound without conscious awareness of musical theory. Their collective buzzing creates layers of tone and rhythm that shift and evolve as individual bees join or leave the group, producing a kind of improvisational ensemble performance that continues without pause from sunrise to sunset, even the marble of which Olympus is constructed. Apollo realizes with growing excitement, contains within its crystalline structure the potential for previously unnoticed musical possibilities. When wind passes over carved surfaces at certain angles, the stone itself begins to vibrate at frequencies that create sounds just at the edge of divine hearing, not quite melodies, but something more complex than mere noise. Patterns of resonance that emerge from the interaction between moving air and precisely shaped matter. These observations begin to coalesce in Apollo's divine consciousness around a central insight that feels both revolutionary and completely natural. What if music could be created not through the imposition of conscious will upon resistant materials, but through the construction of systems that would generate beauty according to their own inherent properties? What if an instrument could be designed that would surprise its player, revealing new possibilities through the very act of being played, rather than simply reproducing predetermined sounds? The idea crystallizes around the memory of that mortal shepherd and his reed flute. The way the young man had discovered the capabilities of his instrument through experimentation rather than technical knowledge. Apollo envisions creating something similar, but far more sophisticated. An instrument that would combine the resonant properties of carefully shaped wood with the harmonic possibilities of precisely tuned strings, yet designed to encourage the kind of spontaneous discovery that characterizes mortal creativity at its best. His divine mind begins to work with concepts that feel familiar yet utterly fresh, the way hollow spaces can focus and amplify vibrations, how the tension and thickness of strings affect their tonal qualities, the manner in which different woods impart their own character to the sounds that pass through them. Yet rather than simply designing the perfect instrument according to mathematical principles, Apollo finds himself imagining a creative process that would involve genuine experimentation, real discovery, the possibility of being surprised by his own creation. The afternoon light of Olympus takes on new qualities as these ideas develop, each golden ray seeming to carry potential melodies, each shadow suggesting unexplored harmonies. For the first time in his immortal existence, Apollo feels the stirring of genuine uncertainty about an outcome, and rather than finding this disturbing, he discovers it to be exhilarating. The restlessness that had plagued him throughout The day has transformed into something far more purposeful, not the aimless desire for novelty, but a focused, creative hunger that demands satisfaction through action rather than contemplation. The workshops await his return, but now he approaches them not as a god seeking to impose his will upon passive materials, but as an explorer preparing to venture into unknown territory where even divine wisdom cannot predict what treasures might be found. In the soft light of the Olympian afternoon, as Apollo's consciousness swirls with new possibilities gathered from his observations of natural harmony, the various elements of his inspiration begin to coalesce around a central vision that feels both as inevitable and completely unprecedented. The image forming in his divine mind is not yet complete, existing more as potential than as concrete design. Yet it carries with it a sense of rightness that resonates through every aspect of his immortal being. He envisions an instrument that would combine the hollow resonance he observed in the bamboo grove with the precise tonal control offered by carefully tensioned strings. Unlike his silver lyre, which projects its music outward with crystalline clarity, this new creation would draw sound inward first, gathering vibrations within a wooden body before releasing them in waves that would carry the warmth and character of the material from which they emerged. The shape begins to form in his imagination, not the angular geometry of traditional stringed instruments, but something more organic, more suggestive of natural forms. Perhaps it should echo the curve of a seashell, designed according to the mathematical principles that govern spiral growth, yet softened into something that would fit comfortably against a player's body. The wood itself should be chosen not just for its acoustic properties, but for its spiritual character, carrying within its grain the accumulated wisdom of seasons and storms, growth and rest. Apollo's divine consciousness works with these concepts in ways that transcend ordinary thought. Each element of the design informing and being informed by all the others in a process that feels more like recognition than invention. The strings should number more than his lyres, 7, allowing for more complex harmonies and subtle interactions between notes. Yet they should not be arranged in a simple linear progression, but rather positioned to encourage the kind of spontaneous discovery he observed in mortal music making. Soundboard becomes a crucial element in his vision. The flat surface of wood across which the strings would stretch, its thickness and grain pattern determining much of the instrument's voice. Too thick, and the wood would constrain the vibrations, producing sounds that were precise but lacking in warmth. Too thin, and the delicate timbre might crack under the tension of the strings. The balance must be perfect, yet achieved through experimentation rather than calculation. Most intriguingly, Apollo begins to imagine an instrument that would age and develop character through use. Unlike divine creations that remain forever unchanged, the wood would gradually settle under the constant tension of the strings, its cellular structure slowly adapting to the stresses placed upon it. The strings themselves would stretch and wear, requiring periodic replacement that would subtly alter the instrument's voice. Even the player's touch would leave its mark over time, the oils from divine fingers gradually staining the wood and affecting its resonant properties. This concept of deliberate impermanence represents such a radical departure from standard divine creative practice that Apollo pauses in his mental, designing to contemplate its implications. Gods typically create things that will endure for eternity, works of art and utility that remain forever at the peak of their perfection. Yet what he envisions is something that would be beautiful precisely because it changes, that would gain character through the accumulation of experience, rather than losing value through the passage of time. The notion excites him in ways that surprise even his divine self-awareness. Here is creativity that acknowledges the value of process over product, that finds beauty in development rather than stasis, that embraces the kind of growth and change that characterizes mortal existence at its most vital. The instrument he imagines would be a bridge between the eternal perfection of divine art and the dynamic imperfection of mortal creativity. As these ideas solidify in his consciousness, Apollo begins to consider the practical aspects of construction. The workshops of Olympus contain materials and tools beyond mortal imagination, Yet he finds himself drawn to resources that retain some connection to the natural world from which his inspiration emerged. The wood should come not from the artificially perfect trees of the divine gardens, but from specimens that have grown in mortal soil. Experiencing the full cycle of seasons, the stress of storms, the patient accumulation of rings that mark the passage of time, the strings present their own challenges and opportunities. Divine materials would produce sounds of absolute purity, never stretching or breaking, never requiring the kind of ongoing maintenance that creates the player's intimate relationship with their instrument. Yet Apollo finds himself imagining strings made from more humble materials, perhaps. The sinews of creatures that have lived and died in the natural world, processed with care, but retaining the organic qualities that would allow them to respond and adapt to the stresses of being played. Even the construction process begins to take shape in his imagination as something different from standard divine making. Rather than willing the completed instrument into existence through pure divine power, he envisions a methodical process of craftsmanship that would unfold over time, each step building upon the previous one, each decision informing the choices that follow. The act of making would become part of the instrument's essence, embedded in its structure, like memory held within wood and string. As the Olympian afternoon deepens toward evening, Apollo's excitement continues to build around this unprecedented creative project. The restlessness that had marked his day has transformed into focused anticipation.
Ow.
The divine equivalent of that moment, when a mortal artist first glimpses the vision that will guide their next great work. Yet unlike typical divine inspiration, which tends toward absolute certainty, this vision retains elements of mystery. It's aspects that can only be resolved through the actual process of creation. For the first time in his immortal existence, Apollo faces the prospect of making something whose final form will surprise even him, whose voice will emerge from the interaction between his intentions and the inherent properties of materials that have their own character and preferences. The thought is both thrilling and humbling, connecting him to the kind of creative adventure that he has observed in mortal artists but never before experienced in his own divine. Practice. 8. Crafting the Lute. Workshops of Olympus transform around Apollo's presence as he begins the unprecedented journey from vision to reality. Divine craftsmanship merged with mortal-inspired process in ways that have never before been attempted in the celestial realm. The tools arrange themselves with respectful attention as the god of music takes up implements that have waited eons to serve such an ambitious creative project. Yet Apollo approaches them with the careful attention of a student rather than the commanding authority typical of divine. Making his first consideration is the selection of wood. And for this crucial choice, he ventures beyond the perfect groves of Olympus to examine timber that has grown in the mortal world. Seasoned by actual weather, shaped by the struggles and successes that mark genuine life, the piece he ultimately selects comes from an olive tree that grew for 3 centuries on a sun-drenched hillside in Greece. Its grain tight, and even from the patient accumulation of seasons, its color warm with the memory of countless summer afternoons. The wood feels different in his divine hands than the perfect materials he's worked with in the past, heavier with accumulated experience, more complex in its cellular structure, carrying within its fibers the chemical signatures of drought years and abundant harvests, the stress patterns of storms weathered, and the relaxed growth that followed gentle seasons. This is wood that has lived rather than merely existed, and Apollo senses that its character will contribute qualities to his instrument that no amount of divine perfection could replicate. The shaping begins slowly, almost meditatively, as Apollo allows his hands to learn the grain and density of his chosen material. Each stroke of the plane removes translucent shavings that curl like flower petals, releasing the sweet, earthy scent of aged olive wood into the crystal air of the workshop. Unlike divine materials that respond instantly to divine will, this mortal timber requires patience, negotiation, a willingness to work with its natural properties rather than imposing arbitrary designs upon its structure. The body emerges gradually from the block of wood, following curves that combine Apollo's artistic vision with the natural inclinations of the grain itself. Where the wood resists, he adjusts his design rather than forcing compliance. Discovering that this collaborative approach produces shapes more graceful and organic than anything he could have predetermined. The back of the instrument develops a gentle arch that follows the tree's original growth patterns, while the sides curve with mathematical precision, softened by the subtle irregularities that mark all living growth. The creation of the sound hole requires particular delicacy, as this opening will determine much of the instrument's voice. Apollo experiments with different sizes and shapes, using divine hearing to test the resonant properties of each variation. Too large, and the sound disperses weakly into the surrounding air. Too small, and the wood's natural vibrations remain trapped within the body. He settles finally on a circular opening, decorated with a simple rosette pattern that echoes the grain of the surrounding wood while adding its own contribution to the instrument's visual harmony. The soundboard demands even greater care, its thickness varying by fractions of divine measurements to optimize the transmission of vibrations from strings to air. Apollo carves this crucial surface with the concentrated attention of one who understands that microscopic differences in thickness will translate into audible variations in tone and volume. The grain must run parallel to the strings to provide optimal resonance, yet maintain enough cross-grain strength to withstand the constant tension that will be placed upon it as the basic structure nears completion. Apollo turns his attention to the more subtle elements that will determine his instrument's character. The bridge, which will transfer string vibrations to the soundboard, must be positioned with mathematical precision, yet carved to accommodate the natural irregularities of handmade strings. The nut, which will hold the strings at their proper spacing at the instrument's head, requires similar precision, combined with the organic curves that make the instrument comfortable to hold and play. The neck presents its own unique challenges, requiring both structural strength to resist the pull of tensioned strings and ergonomic grace to accommodate a player's hands moving freely along its length. Apollo shapes it from the same piece of olive wood, maintaining the material continuity that will allow vibrations to flow seamlessly from strings through neck to body. The curve he creates feels perfect in his divine hands, yet he adjusts it repeatedly, remembering the mortal musicians he observed, and their need for instruments that respond to human proportions and limitations. String selection becomes an extended meditation on the balance between durability and sensitivity. Divine materials would last forever, but lack the organic responsiveness that Apollo seeks to incorporate into his creation. He chooses instead gut strings processed from sheep that grazed in blessed meadows, seasoned with care but retaining the natural variations that will allow them to stretch and settle, to develop character through use, to require the kind of ongoing attention that creates intimacy between player and instrument. The stringing process unfolds with ritualistic care, each string brought gradually to its proper tension as the wood adjusts to new stresses, and the entire instrument settles into its final configuration. Apollo listens with growing excitement as each additional string changes the harmonic possibilities of those already in place, creating complex interactions that even his divine understanding cannot fully predict. The tuning pegs, carved from ebony that gleams like captured midnight, must hold their strings firmly, yet turn smoothly when adjustment is needed. Apollo creates these with the patient attention of a master craftsman, understanding that these small components will be crucial to the instrument's ongoing relationship with whoever plays it. Each peg is fitted to its hole with precision that allows easy tuning while preventing the frustrating slippage that would interrupt musical flow as the construction nears completion. Apollo steps back to survey his creation with eyes that have never before looked upon anything quite like it. The instrument rests in his hands with a weight that feels both substantial and manageable, its curved body fitting naturally against his torso, its neck extending at an angle that invites his fingers to explore the musical possibilities held within its carefully strings. The wood has taken on a depth and richness through the construction process, its natural oils rising to the surface to create a finish that glows with inner warmth. The strings catch the workshop's light and seem to vibrate with potential even when untouched, promising sounds that exist only in possibility until divine fingers awaken them into actual music. For the first time in his immortal existence, Apollo holds something he has created whose ultimate voice remains unknown even to him, whose true character will only be revealed through the mystery of being played. The moment approaches with the weight of historical significance, though in the quiet workshop of Olympus, surrounded by the gentle glow of divine creativity, it feels as intimate and personal as a whispered prayer. Apollo settles into a chair that molds itself to his divine form, cradling his newly completed instrument against his chest with the tender care of one holding something infinitely precious yet utterly fragile. The wood feels warm against his skin, almost alive with potential energy stored in its carefully shaped curves and hollow spaces. The strings stretch before him like captured sunbeams, their tension creating a kind of anticipation that seems to permeate the very air of the workshop. Even the crystal walls appear to lean inward slightly, as if the chamber itself is holding its breath in expectation of sounds that have never before existed in any realm, mortal or divine. Apollo's right hand hovers over the strings with uncharacteristic hesitation. Divine fingers that have created countless perfect melodies on his silver lyre, suddenly uncertain of their destination. This moment represents something unprecedented in his immortal experience, the possibility of genuine surprise, the chance to discover something even he cannot predict. The sensation is both exhilarating and slightly terrifying, connecting him to the vulnerable excitement that mortal musicians must feel when they first encounter a new instrument. His first touch is so gentle it barely disturbs the string's rest. The faintest whisper of sound emerges, not quite a note, more like the promise of music, a suggestion of melody that hangs in the crystal air for just a moment before fading into the profound silence that surrounds all Olympian activity. Yet even this ghost of sound carries qualities that Apollo has never experienced in his previous musical endeavors. Textures and overtones that speak of wood and gut and the patient craftsmanship that brought them together. Encouraged by this promising beginning, Apollo allows his fingers to settle more deliberately against the strings. His touch, informed by millennia of musical experience, yet approached with the careful attention of discovery, draws forth sounds that seem to emerge from the very heart of the olive wood. Unlike the crystalline precision of his lyre, these notes carry warmth and character, imperfections that somehow enhance rather than diminish their beauty. The lowest string yields a tone that seems to contain echoes of the earth from which the olive tree drew its substance, deep and woody, rich with harmonics that suggest autumn leaves and aged wine. The higher strings sing with increasing clarity, yet each retains the organic quality that connects it to its origins in living creatures and growing plants. When Apollo plucks multiple strings simultaneously, the harmonies that result are unlike anything in his previous musical experience, complex and shifting as the individual notes decay at different rates. As his confidence with the instrument grows, Apollo begins to experiment with techniques that the lute's construction makes possible. He can bend strings while they vibrate, creating microtonal variations that add emotional expression to simple melodies. He can dampen certain strings while allowing others to ring freely, crafting rhythmic patterns that pulse like a living heartbeat. He can play melody lines against sustained bass notes, creating the illusion of multiple voices emerging from a single instrument. Most remarkably, the lute seems to encourage a kind of playing that feels more conversational than declarative. Where his lyre projects music outward with divine authority, this new instrument draws him into intimate dialogue, responding to subtle changes in touch and pressure with corresponding variations in tone and volume. The music that emerges feels collaborative rather than imposed, as if the instrument itself is contributing ideas that even Apollo had not consciously considered. The melodies that flow from this first extended session develop organically, themes appearing and transforming in ways that surprise even their divine creator. Apollo finds himself following musical paths that he would never have chosen through deliberate planning, yet which feel completely natural as they unfold. Ideas emerge from the interplay between conscious intention and the instrument's own acoustic properties, creating a kind of improvisation that transcends the usual boundaries between composer, performer, and instrument. The quality of time itself seems to shift as he plays, the eternal now of Olympian existence giving way to something more fluid and developmental. Each note informs those that follow, while building upon those that came before, creating a temporal structure that feels more connected to mortal experience than divine timelessness. For the first time in his immortal existence, Apollo experiences duration as something meaningful rather than merely quantitative. The physical sensation of playing adds another dimension to the musical experience. The instrument's body resonates against his chest, transmitting vibrations through his divine form in ways that make him feel connected to the music at a cellular level. The slight pressure required to fret the strings, the subtle resistance of the tuning pegs, the gentle give of the soundboard under his touch. All of these tactile experiences contribute to a sense of intimate partnership between player and instrument. As the session continues, Apollo becomes aware that something fundamental has changed in his relationship to music making. The restless boredom that had marked his day has been replaced by deep satisfaction. Not the satisfaction of completing a predetermined task, but the joy of ongoing discovery. Each new combination of notes reveals fresh possibilities. Each experimental technique opens doors to unexplored musical territories. The first notes gradually evolve into the first phrases, then into the first complete melodies that this new instrument has ever voiced. These are not compositions in any formal sense, lacking the structured development that characterizes divine music. Yet they possess their own organic logic that emerges from the marriage of Apollo's immortal creativity with the humble materials of mortal origin. As the Olympian afternoon deepens toward evening and the HMC golden light of the workshop takes on softer hues, Apollo continues his exploration of his creation's voice, each moment of playing revealing new facets of its character, new possibilities for expression that exist only in the intimate conversation between divine fingers and carefully crafted strings. The new music spreads through the marble corridors of Olympus with the subtle persistence of morning mist, seeping into spaces that have echoed for eons with the familiar harmonies of divine existence. Unlike Apollo's traditional lyre compositions, which announce themselves with crystalline authority, these warmer, more complex sounds move almost stealthily through the palace, carried by the perfect acoustics of celestial architecture, into chambers where they settle like golden dust in the corners of immortal consciousness. Zeus becomes aware of the change during his evening survey of the mortal realm. Though his first reaction is not recognition, but rather a subtle shift in attention, the way one might notice that a familiar room has been rearranged without immediately identifying what has changed. The king of gods pauses in his contemplation of earthly affairs, his ancient ears detecting harmonies that seem to follow familiar patterns, yet carry unfamiliar textures. Melodies that speak with Apollo's unmistakable voice, yet say things they have never said before. He does not turn from his great window overlooking creation, does not call for explanation or investigation. Instead, Zeus settles more deeply into his throne of polished obsidian, allowing these new sounds to wash over divine senses that have grown perhaps more weary than he would ever admit. There is something in this music that speaks to aspects of his consciousness that have remained dormant for centuries, not the overwhelming majesty of storms or the terrible beauty of lightning, but something gentler, more connected to the patient cycles of growth that he observes but rarely experiences. In chambers devoted to the endless pursuit of wisdom, Athena lifts her gray eyes from the scroll she has been studying, her sharp intellect immediately recognizing that something unprecedented is occurring within the familiar boundaries of Olympian existence. The goddess, whose understanding encompasses all forms of knowledge, finds herself confronting sounds that her vast learning cannot immediately categorize, melodies that seem to emerge from creative processes she has observed in theory, but never before encountered in divine practice. Her eternal flame flickers in patterns that seem to echo the new music's cadences, its colors shifting through spectra that reflect the complex harmonies drifting through her crystal walls. The scrolls that feed her fire burn with different hues today, their accumulated wisdom somehow enhanced by this acoustic backdrop that speaks of discovery itself, of learning achieved through exploration rather than revelation. For once, Athena allows herself the rare luxury of simply listening, of receiving rather than analyzing, her normally busy hands resting quietly in her lap as ancient wisdom encounters. Genuinely new experience. Hermes encounters the changed atmosphere during one of his periodic returns from message-carrying duties, his winged sandals touching down on marble floors that seem to hum with previously unknown resonances. The messenger god's eternally youthful features register first curiosity and growing delight as he recognizes the source and nature of what he hears. A slow smile spreads across his face. Not surprise, for gods rarely experience true surprise, but rather the quiet satisfaction that comes when something long anticipated finally arrives, in forms more beautiful than even divine imagination had dared to hope. He makes no move to investigate directly, understanding with the intuitive tact that characterizes his diplomatic nature that Apollo needs space to explore this discovery without the pressure of divine attention. Instead, Hermes continues his eternal tasks with subtly altered rhythm, his movements unconsciously adapting to match the gentle pulse that now underlies the palace's acoustic environment, his own activities becoming part of the larger harmony that the new music has introduced to Olympian life. Artemis becomes aware of the change during one of her rare visits to the palace. Fresh from her wild forests with pine needles still clinging to her silver robes and the scent of mountain streams in her hair, the goddess of the hunt pauses in the great hall's entrance. Her hunter's instincts immediately alert to alterations in her familiar environment, yet her usual sharp focus when detecting something new in her territory gives way to gradual relaxation as these sounds prove themselves benevolent rather than threatening. She settles onto a marble bench she has never used before, her silver bow laying forgotten across her knees as she allows herself to be drawn into the music's gentle embrace. Something about these melodies reminds her of the quiet moments in her forests, not the dramatic excitement of the chase or the precise flight of her arrows, but the peaceful interludes when deer graze in sunlit meadows and streams, murmur secrets to moss-covered stones. The music speaks a language she recognizes, though she has never heard it before, connecting the wild places of her domain to the civilized spaces of Olympian architecture, through harmonies that bridge natural and artificial beauty. Even Hera, usually absorbed in her own complex projects and cosmic concerns, finds her attention drawn to these new sounds as they drift into her weaving chamber where she works on tapestries that tell the stories of mortal love and divine intervention. Her needle, which has been following the same intricate patterns for countless centuries, begins to trace new designs as it responds unconsciously to rhythms it has never encountered, creating visual representations of music that has no visual equivalent. The threads of moonbeam and starlight seem to weave themselves into configurations that echo the lute's gentle complexity, silver and gold combining in patterns that suggest rather than describe, that captures something essential about the emotional quality of Apollo's discovery, rather than attempting literal translation of sound into sight. For the first time in eons, Hera's eternal tapestry acquires elements that surprise even its creator. Beauty emerging from the marriage of conscious skill with unconscious response to unprecedented inspiration. Aphrodite, goddess of beauty in all its forms, recognizes immediately that something extraordinary has entered the aesthetic environment of Olympus. From her gardens, where she tends flowers that bloom in colors beyond mortal spectrum, she lifts her perfect face toward the palace with an expression of wondering delight. The new music speaks to aspects of beauty that even her divine understanding has never fully explored, not the overwhelming perfection that characterizes most divine art, but something more subtle, more connected to the kind of beauty that emerges from growth and change rather than eternal stasis. The collective response of Olympus to Apollo's musical innovation is not dramatic recognition or formal acknowledgement, but rather a subtle transformation in the palace's entire emotional atmosphere. Divine beings who have existed in states of perfect equilibrium for eons find themselves experiencing something that might, in mortals, be called anticipation, a gentle curiosity about what this new voice might say next, where these unfamiliar melodies might lead. What other discoveries might emerge from this unprecedented creative adventure? as the eternal afternoon light of Olympus settles into the softer tones that mark the approach of divine evening. The various gods gradually adapt to this new element in their perfect environment, their own activities unconsciously adjusting to accommodate rhythms they have never heard before, yet somehow always expected. As Apollo continues his exploration of the lute's voice, the music that emerges from his divine creativity begins to exert influences that extend far beyond the marble halls of Olympus. Flowing down the mountainside like honey, seeping into the mortal realm with the gentle persistence of morning dew, the melodies that began as intimate conversation between god and instrument gradually expand their reach, touching aspects of existence that neither Apollo nor his celestial audience could have anticipated. In the villages scattered across the Greek countryside, shepherds tending their evening flocks notice that their animals have grown unusually calm. Sheep that normally wander restlessly at dusk, now settling peacefully in the meadows, their usual bleating replaced by contented silence. The shepherds themselves feel the change without understanding its source, a loosening of tensions they did not realize they carried, a softening of anxieties that have marked their days since childhood. The old shepherd whom Apollo observed earlier, still carrying his handmade reed flute, pauses in his evening walk and looks toward the distant peak of Olympus with eyes that see nothing unusual, yet sense something profound. His own rough music, which had earlier inspired a god, now seems to harmonize with melodies that drift down from the sacred mountain, like blessings made audible. He raises his simple instrument to his lips and plays tentative notes that blend with the divine harmony. Mortal creativity joining immortal inspiration in ways that neither fully comprehends in the coastal cities, where merchants count their profits and sailors prepare for dawn departures. The restless energy that typically marks commercial centers begins to subside as Apollo's music works its subtle influence on human consciousness. Negotiations that might have continued late into the night resolve themselves with unexpected ease. Agreements reached not through sharp bargaining, but through the kind of mutual understanding that emerges when artificial barriers dissolve in the presence of genuine beauty. The sea itself responds to these divine harmonies. Waves that have beaten against the rocky shores with relentless force for countless ages, now settling into gentler rhythms that echo the lute's cadences. Sailors offshore notice the change first, as a subtle shift in the water's movement, swells that seem to breathe rather than crash. Currents that flow with musical rather than merely mechanical precision. Ships that have struggled against contrary winds find their sails, filling with cooperative breezes that carry them forward with unprecedented smoothness. In the sacred groves, where mortals come to seek divine guidance, the very trees seem to lean closer together as if listening to harmonies that speak directly to their woody hearts. The leaves rustle with different voices now, or whispered conversations carrying traces of the melodies that drift down from Olympus like invisible rain. Pilgrims who have traveled great distances to consult the oracles find their anxiety replaced by peaceful confidence. Not because their questions have been answered, but because the questions themselves no longer seem urgent in the presence of beauty that transcends immediate concerns. Children playing in village squares discover that their games have taken on new qualities, their laughter harmonizing with Apollo's distant music in ways that create joy more profound than simple amusement. Their parents, watching from doorways and windows, feel memories stirring of their own childhood wonder, times when the world seemed full of possibility and every sunset promised new adventures in the morning. The harsh realities of adult existence, the constant struggle for survival, the weight of responsibility, the accumulated disappointments of years soften in the presence of melodies that remind them of dreams they had forgotten. They once cherished, even the wild creatures. A forest and mountain respond to this divine influence. Predators and prey alike, pausing in their eternal cycles of hunt and flight to listen to sounds that speak to aspects of animal consciousness. Usually overwhelmed by the demands of survival, wolves rest peacefully beside streams where deer come to drink. Not from any suspension of natural law, but from a temporary transcendence of the fear and aggression that normally govern their interactions. The very air seems to carry the music more willingly than it carries ordinary sound. molecules of wind and water vapor arranging themselves to provide perfect acoustic transmission for harmonies that deserve to be heard by every ear capable of receiving them. Farmers working late in their fields pause in their labor as these melodies wash over them. Hands that have grown rough from decades of honest toil momentarily, forgetting their aches and pains in the presence of beauty that speaks directly to the soul. In temples dedicated to various gods throughout the Greek world, priests and priestesses notice that their evening prayers flow more easily. Words that have been repeated countless times suddenly carrying deeper meaning as they blend with divine music that seems to emanate from the very heart of religious experience. The boundary between mortal supplication and divine response blurs as Apollo's lute harmonies create bridges between earthly longing and celestial fulfillment. Scholars in their studies find that complex philosophical problems that have puzzled them for years begin to resolve themselves as their minds relax into the gentle rhythms of divine creativity. Mathematical relationships that seemed impossibly abstract reveal their elegant simplicity when approached in the peaceful mental state that Apollo's music induces. Poets discover new metaphors flowing from their pens, words arranging themselves into patterns that capture previously inexpressible truths about the nature of beauty and meaning. As the night deepens and Apollo's playing continues in his Olympian workshop, the influence of his creation spreads ever wider, touching aspects of existence throughout the mortal realm with transformative gentleness. This is not the overwhelming power typically associated with divine intervention, but something far more subtle and perhaps more profound: the simple gift of beauty offered freely to any consciousness capable of receiving it. Divine creativity blessing the world not through dramatic miracle, but through the quiet miracle of music that speaks directly to the heart of what it means to be alive. In the gentle radiance of his workshop, surrounded by the evidence of his unprecedented creative achievement, Apollo continues to explore the voice of his creation with the wondering attention of one who has discovered not just a new instrument, but a new way of existing within the eternal framework of divine life. The restless dissatisfaction that had marked his earlier hours has been completely transformed, replaced by a sense of deep fulfillment that emerges not from completion but from ongoing process. Not from perfection achieved, but from beauty continually discovered. Each melody that flows from the lute's carefully crafted body brings with it fresh possibilities. New combinations of notes and rhythms that Apollo could never have anticipated through pure planning. The instrument seems to possess its own musical preferences, subtle resistances and unexpected resonances that guide his divine fingers toward combinations he would never have consciously chosen yet, which feel completely natural as they emerge. This collaborative aspect of creation, this sense of partnership between maker and made, represents something entirely unprecedented in his immortal experience. The physical sensation of playing adds depth to his satisfaction in ways that surprise him with their intensity. The slight calluses beginning to form on his fingertips, the first imperfections his divine skin has ever borne, feel like badges of honor rather than flaws. Evidence of genuine engagement with materials that respond to effort rather than yielding instantly to divine will. The gentle ache in his shoulders from hours of concentrated playing connects him to mortal experiences of creative labor that he has observed, but never shared. Most remarkably, Apollo finds himself experiencing time in ways that feel entirely new, despite his eons of existence, where divine consciousness typically operates in an eternal present, with perfect awareness of past and future collapsed into each moment. Playing the lute creates its own temporal structure that unfolds sequentially, each note building meaning through its relationship to those that came before and those that will follow. For the first time in his immortal existence, Apollo experiences duration as something meaningful, rather than merely quantitative. The boredom that had seemed so inexplicable earlier in the day now reveals itself to have been not emptiness, but creative hunger. Not the absence of purpose, but the presence of potential seeking expression. His divine nature, perfectly adapted to the responsibilities of solar guidance and musical inspiration, had apparently contained unexplored capacities for the kind of discovery-based creativity that characterizes mortal artistic endeavor at its finest. This insight brings with it a new understanding of the mortals whose musical efforts had initially inspired his creative project. Their imperfect attempts, their struggles with resistant materials, their delight in small discoveries, all of these qualities that had seemed charmingly primitive, from his divine perspective, now reveal themselves as aspects of a creative process that even immortal beings can benefit from. Embracing Apollo's relationship to his traditional duties begins to shift as well, colored by the new perspectives that his lute-making adventure has provided. The daily journey across the sky with his solar chariot, while still performed with flawless efficiency, now carries additional layers of meaning as he observes the mortal world with eyes that have been opened to previously. Unnoticed forms of beauty, the shepherd's afternoon melodies, the merchant's work songs, the children's playground rhymes, all of these humble musical expressions now register in his divine consciousness, not as crude approximations of celestial perfection, but as authentic achievements worthy of respect and study. Even his prophetic responsibilities take on new dimensions as he recognizes that genuine wisdom might sometimes emerge from uncertainty rather than omniscience, from the willingness to explore unknown territories rather than from the simple application of perfect knowledge to predetermined problems. The oracles through which he speaks to mortal inquirers begin to offer guidance that encourages experimentation and discovery, rather than merely revealing fixed destinies. His relationships with his fellow gods, too, shows signs of subtle transformation as the music from his workshop continues to influence the emotional atmosphere of Olympus. Conversations that might once have followed predictable patterns now develop unexpected depth as the various immortals find themselves responding to the creative energy that Apollo's project has introduced to their eternal environment. Even Zeus, in their next formal interaction, shows signs of curiosity about his son's new endeavor that transcend typical paternal interest in accomplished offspring. The lute itself continues to evolve under Apollo's attentive playing, its voice gradually developing characteristics that emerge from the interaction between his divine technique and the instrument's organic materials. The gut strings stretch and settle, their tension adjusting to create subtle changes in pitch and timbre that require constant minor adjustments. In his playing technique, far from finding these imperfections annoying, Apollo discovers them to be sources of ongoing interest. Small variables that keep his musical explorations fresh and unpredictable. The olive wood of the instrument's body begins to respond to the constant vibrations passing through its cellular structure, the grain patterns seeming to organize themselves around the most frequently used resonant frequencies. The soundboard, initially uniform in its response characteristics, develops zones of varying sensitivity that add complexity to the instrument's voice while requiring increasingly sophisticated technique to exploit fully as the Olympian. Night deepens around his absorbed experimentation. Apollo finds himself settling into rhythms of creative work that feel both utterly natural and completely revolutionary. The urgent restlessness that had driven him from his familiar chambers has been replaced by patient engagement. The desire for dramatic novelty transformed into appreciation for subtle variation within established patterns. For the first time since his divine consciousness first awakened at the beginning of creation, Apollo experiences the peculiar satisfaction that comes from having found not just something to do, but something that seems worth doing indefinitely. Activity that creates its own justification through the simple fact of how deeply satisfying it feels to pursue it. The boredom that had seemed like such a problem now reveals itself to have been not a flaw in divine existence, but a doorway to possibilities that had always existed, but never before been explored. As the golden light of Olympus softens into the deeper hues that mark the transition from divine afternoon to evening, Apollo settles more deeply into his exploration of the lute's possibilities, his divine consciousness entering a state of creative flow that transcends even immortal concepts of time and duration. The workshop around him seems to pulse gently with the rhythms of his playing, crystal walls reflecting and amplifying each note until the entire chamber becomes a single instrument resonating With divine creativity, the melodies that emerge during these extended hours of exploration develop their own organic logic. Themes appearing and disappearing like memories surfacing from depths he did not know his consciousness contained. Unlike his previous musical compositions, which emerged fully formed from divine intention, these improvisations unfold through genuine discovery, each phrase suggesting new possibilities that he follows, with the eager attention of an explorer, mapping unknown territory. The physical environment of the workshop gradually adapts to accommodate this unprecedented creative session. Tools that had been carefully arranged on workbenches reorganize themselves to provide optimal acoustic reflection. Unused materials migrate to positions where they cannot interfere with the sound waves that now fill every corner of the space. Even the crystalline walls adjust their translucency to filter the eternal Olympian light into softer tones more conducive to the intimate music-making that has transformed the chamber into something resembling a mortal musician's private studio. As the hours pass, though time moves differently when measured by creative engagement rather than celestial mechanics, Apollo's technique continues to evolve, his divine fingers developing subtle skills that no amount of theoretical knowledge could have provided. The calluses that form on his fingertips create new textures of contact with the strings, allowing for microtonal variations that add emotional depth to simple melodies. The slight stiffness that accumulates in his shoulders teaches him the value of rhythmic variation, encouraging him to incorporate periods of rest and reflection that make the active passages more meaningful by contrast. The gut strings themselves begin to show signs of their organic origins, stretching and settling in ways that require constant minor adjustments, yet provide ever-changing colors of tone and timbre. Far from finding these imperfections frustrating, Apollo discovers them to be sources of ongoing fascination. It's variables that ensure no melody will ever sound exactly the same way twice. The instrument is becoming not just a tool for creating predetermined music, but a living partner in an ongoing conversation about the nature of beauty and meaning. The olive wood of the lute's body resonates with increasing richness as the hours of playing awaken resonant frequencies that had remained dormant since the tree from which it was carved first pushed its roots into Greek soil. Each note seems to unlock new acoustic possibilities within the wood's cellular structure, creating harmonics and overtones that surprise even Apollo's perfect divine hearing. The instrument is simultaneously revealing its character and developing new aspects of that character through the very process of being played. Most remarkably, Apollo begins to experience something that can only be described as musical memory, not the perfect recall that characterizes divine consciousness, but rather the more organic form of memory that emerges when experience accumulates gradually through repetition and variation. Melodies he played hours earlier return to his fingers with subtle differences, transformed by the intervening exploration into variants that retain familiar elements while expressing new possibilities. This developing musical memory creates its own temporal structure. Within the eternal framework of Olympian existence, Apollo finds himself returning to themes and variations not because he plans to do so, but because they call to him from the accumulating layers of his creative session. Like friends glimpsed in a crowd whose faces become clearer upon closer approach, the music begins to develop not just beauty, but history, becoming richer and more complex as it builds upon its own foundations. The influence of this extended creative session continues to radiate outward from the workshop, affecting not just the immediate environment of Olympus, but the broader patterns of divine existence throughout the celestial realm. Other gods find their own activities subtly modified by the constant background of Apollo's exploration, their conversations taking on new rhythms, their movements adapting to accommodate harmonies that seem to emerge from the very stones of the sacred mountain. Even the mortal world below continues to receive the benefits of this divine creativity, as Apollo's music drifts downward through layers of cloud and atmosphere to touch earthly consciousness with unprecedented gentleness. Sleep comes more easily to mortals this night, their dreams filled with harmonies they cannot quite remember. Upon waking yet, which leave them feeling more rested and hopeful than any ordinary slumber could. Provide in shepherds' huts scattered across the Greek countryside. Simple men who have never traveled beyond their local valleys find themselves humming melodies they have never heard. Tunes that seem to emerge from their hearts rather than their memories. Children fall asleep to lullabies their mothers sing without knowing where the words and music originated. Songs that seem to flow directly from the loving impulse that prompts all parental comfort. Artists working late by lamplight discover that their hands move with unprecedented sureness, creating works that surprise them with their beauty and coherence. Philosophers wrestling with complex questions find their minds clearing as Apollo's distant harmonies provide a soundtrack for thinking that transcends ordinary intellectual analysis. Even lovers embracing in the darkness find their passion, enhanced by musical accompaniment that seems to emanate from the very air around them as the night deepens and Apollo's creative exploration continues without pause. The boundary between player and instrument begins to blur in ways that even divine consciousness finds difficult to articulate. The lute responds so sensitively to his touch that it seems to anticipate his intentions, while his playing adapts so completely to the instrument's characteristics that his technique becomes inseparable from its voice. The collaboration between mortal materials and immortal creativity achieves a synthesis that neither could have accomplished alone. 14. The lute becomes a legacius. The first hints of approaching dawn begin to lighten the eternal sky above Olympus. Apollo's night-long exploration of his creation gradually transitions from intensive discovery to peaceful mastery, his divine consciousness settling into comfortable familiarity with an instrument that has already begun to feel like an extension of his immortal being. Yet even as his technique stabilizes and his understanding deepens, new possibilities continue to emerge from the marriage of divine creativity with mortal-inspired materials. The transformation in Apollo's relationship to music making has not gone unnoticed by the other gods, whose own creative endeavors begin to show subtle influences from the revolutionary approach their colleague has pioneered. Athena finds herself approaching her eternal scholarly pursuits with increased willingness to explore unknown territories, rather than simply organizing existing knowledge. Aphrodite discovers new combinations of beauty emerging from her gardens, as she experiments with previously untried arrangements of color, form, and fragrance. Even Zeus, observing the changes in his son's demeanor and the broader impact of the lute's influence throughout Olympus, begins to consider whether divine creativity might benefit from incorporating elements of uncertainty and discovery that had previously been associated exclusively with mortal endeavor. The king of gods does not abandon his fundamental authority, but his exercise of that authority becomes more nuanced, more responsive to the organic development of situations, rather than simply imposing predetermined solutions. The real test of Apollo's innovation, however, lies not in its immediate impact on divine consciousness, but in its potential to enrich the ongoing relationship between gods and mortals. As the new day brings renewed contact between celestial and earthly realms, Apollo begins to discover ways of incorporating his lute into the traditional aspects of his divine role that serve mortal needs and aspirations. The first opportunity arises during his morning consultation with the priests who serve as intermediaries. At his various oracles throughout the Greek world, instead of delivering his prophetic guidance through the usual direct inspiration that produces cryptic utterances requiring interpretation, Apollo accompanies his divine communication with gentle melodies played on his lute. The priests find that these musical accompaniments help them understand not just the literal content of divine messages, but their emotional significance, the underlying compassion and wisdom that motivate even the most difficult prophetic warnings. Mortals seeking healing at Apollo's temples discover that their recovery proceeds more smoothly when accompanied by the lute's harmonies, which seem to work directly on the spiritual dimensions of illness and injury. The music does not replace the divine power that repairs damaged flesh and bone, but it provides a medium through which that power can work more gently and completely, addressing not just physical symptoms, but the fear and despair that often accompany mortal suffering. Most significantly, Apollo begins to share his lute music directly with mortal musicians. It's not through the overwhelming inspiration that typically characterizes divine artistic influence, but through gentler guidance that encourages human creativity rather than replacing it. Bards and poets find their own compositions flowing more easily when they open their consciousness to harmonies that drift down from Olympus like beneficial weather. The shepherd who had inadvertently inspired Apollo's creative adventure receives particular attention, his simple reed flute enhanced by divine blessing until it produces sounds of unprecedented beauty while remaining recognizably the product of human craftsmanship. Other musicians throughout the Greek world begin to experiment with stringed instruments of their own design, guided by half-remembered dreams of divine music that encourage innovation without overwhelming mortal creativity with impossible standards of perfection. The construction techniques Apollo developed during his lute-making process begin to influence mortal craftsmanship in subtle ways. As human woodworkers and metalworkers find themselves drawn to approaches that emphasize collaboration with natural materials rather than domination over them, the tools and methods that emerge from this influenced craftsmanship retain distinctly mortal characteristics while achieving new levels of beauty and functionality. Trade routes that carry musical instruments and knowledge of construction techniques begin to follow new patterns, connecting communities that share similar approaches to balancing divine inspiration with human creativity. The lute itself, though remaining unique to Apollo's personal use, inspires countless variations as mortal musicians adapt its basic principles to their own cultural traditions and available materials. Temples dedicated to Apollo throughout the Greek world begin to incorporate architectural features designed to enhance acoustic properties, creating spaces where mortal and divine music can blend harmoniously during religious ceremonies. The priests who serve these temples develop new forms of worship that combine traditional prayers with musical elements that encourage congregation participation rather than passive observation. Educational institutions, particularly those devoted to musical training, discover that their students learn more effectively when instruction emphasizes exploration and discovery rather than mere repetition of established techniques. The balance between discipline and creativity that Apollo achieved in his own lute playing provides a model for teaching approaches that honor both technical skill and artistic expression. Perhaps most importantly, the story of Apollo's creative adventure begins to circulate among mortals, not as another tale of overwhelming divine power, but as an inspiring example of how even immortal beings can find fulfillment through patient exploration and humble collaboration with natural materials. The myth that emerges from these events encourages human creativity by suggesting that the most profound innovations often arise from simple curiosity, combined with willingness to work respectfully with available resources. As reports of mortal musical achievements enhanced by divine influence reach Olympus, Apollo experiences a new form of satisfaction that transcends even the joy he found in his own creative discovery. The knowledge that his innovation continues to generate beauty throughout the mortal world creates a sense of ongoing purpose that enriches every aspect of his immortal existence. The lute that began as a response to divine boredom has become something far more significant, a bridge between immortal perfection and mortal aspiration, a demonstration that creativity can flourish when consciousness remains open to influences that transcend its own immediate boundaries. In creating his instrument, Apollo has not just solved his personal problem of restlessness, but has contributed something genuinely new to the ongoing conversation between divine possibility and human achievement. As the eternal cycle of Olympian existence settles back into its familiar rhythms, now enriched by the gentle presence of Apollo's lute music woven through the golden atmosphere. Like a new thread in an ancient tapestry, the god of music finds himself experiencing a form of contentment that transcends even divine satisfaction. The instrument rests in his hands with the comfortable weight of a trusted companion. Its voice now as familiar as his own breath, yet still capable of surprising him with new possibilities discovered in moments of quiet exploration. The workshop that witnessed the birth of this unprecedented creation has transformed around the ongoing presence of music making. Its crystal walls now tuned to respond harmoniously to the frequencies that Apollo's playing has made familiar. Tools that once served their function and returned to storage now remain arranged in configurations that enhance the acoustic properties of the space, creating an environment optimized not just for construction, but for the ongoing relationship between player and instrument that construction made possible. In the broader halls of Olympus, the other gods have adapted to the changed acoustic environment with the graceful acceptance that characterizes a mortal adjustment to new realities. Zeus continues his eternal oversight of mortal affairs, but his observations are now accompanied by background harmonies that add emotional depth to his understanding of human struggles and achievements. Athena's scholarly pursuits unfold against melodies that seem to encourage the kind of exploratory thinking that leads to genuine discovery rather than mere organization of existing knowledge. The daily routine of divine existence continues with all its familiar elements intact, yet everything has been subtly enhanced by the presence of music that speaks to aspects of immortal consciousness previously unexplored. Conversations flow more naturally, pauses between words filled with harmonies that add meaning to silence. Movements through the marble corridors acquire unconscious rhythmic elements that transform simple locomotion into something approaching dance. Even the mortal world below shows signs of lasting transformation as the influence of Apollo's innovation continues to ripple outward through human consciousness. Musicians throughout the Greek lands find their creativity enhanced by the ongoing inspiration that drifts down from Olympus like beneficial rain, while ordinary mortals discover that their daily activities flow more smoothly when accompanied by the half-remembered melodies that seem to emerge from the very air around them. The shepherd whose simple music first inspired a god continues his humble rounds among the flocks, his reed flute now blessed with divine favor that allows it to produce sounds of extraordinary beauty while remaining recognizably the product of mortal craftsmanship. His melodies have acquired new depth and complexity, yet they retain the authentic human quality that originally caught Apollo's attention, creating music that speaks to both earthly experience and celestial aspiration. Children playing in village squares throughout Greece discover that their games have taken on musical qualities that enhance their joy without overwhelming their natural spontaneity. Their laughter harmonizes with Apollo's distant playing in ways that create community celebrations, extending far beyond individual amusement, bringing families and neighbors together in shared appreciation of beauty that costs nothing, yet enriches everything it touches. As the day that began with divine restlessness draws toward its peaceful conclusion, Apollo settles into the evening routine that has marked countless ages of immortal existence. Yet now this familiar rhythm carries new meaning derived from creative achievement that surprises even its divine creator. The lute requires care and attention that his silver lyre never needed, strings that must be tuned as they stretch and settle. Would that benefits from gentle cleaning to maintain its resonant properties? Instruments that develops character through use, rather than remaining forever unchanged. These maintenance requirements, which might seem burdensome to a mortal consciousness accustomed to permanent perfection, revealed themselves instead to be sources of ongoing connection between Apollo and his creation. Each adjustment of tension, each careful cleaning of the soundboard, each minor repair of where that inevitably accumulates through use becomes an opportunity for renewed appreciation of the instrument's unique qualities and continued potential for surprising its player. The relationship between God and lute has evolved into something resembling friendship, not the overwhelming dominance typical of divine creativity, but genuine partnership based on mutual respect and ongoing discovery. Apollo's technique continues to develop as he learns new ways to work with his instrument's characteristics, while the lute itself seems to respond by revealing previously hidden capabilities that emerge only through patient exploration. As the Olympian evening deepens into night and Apollo's playing gradually slows too, match the peaceful rhythms of approaching rest. The melodies that flow from his exploration become more contemplative, more connected to the broader cycles of existence that encompass both mortal and immortal experience. The music speaks of satisfaction earned through effort, of beauty discovered through patience, of connections forged between consciousness and the material world through respectful collaboration. The final notes of this session fade slowly into the perfect silence that surrounds all Olympian activity. Yet this silence now carries different qualities than it possessed before Apollo's creative adventure began. It is not emptiness but fullness, not absence but presence so complete that it requires no sound to make itself known. The lute rests quietly in its creator's hands, its strings still vibrating faintly with the memory of melodies that have already begun their journey into mortal consciousness, where they will inspire new creativity for generations yet to come. And in this perfect silence, enriched by the knowledge of music that can be created but need not be performed, blessed by the satisfaction of problems solved through patient creativity, Apollo closes his eyes and allows his immortal consciousness to drift toward the restorative rest that even gods require. His divine dreams filled with harmonies that speak of infinite possibility, discovered through humble engagement with the beautiful complexity of existence itself.